The rain had begun before dawn and had not stopped all day. It drummed softly against the tall windows of Ashford Hall and turned the vast estate beyond them into a watercolor of silver mist and dark green hedgerows. Inside the great house, however, everything remained orderly, polished, and painfully unchanged. Duke Alexander Ashford stood alone in the portrait gallery, staring at the painting of his mother. 5 years had passed since the Duchess of Ashford had died, yet her absence lingered in every corridor. The servants still lowered their voices when speaking of her. Fresh flowers still appeared beneath her portrait each week. Even the old hound seemed to pause beside the fireplace where she had once sat. Alexander folded his hands behind his back. At 34, he possessed everything society claimed a man should desire. He was wealthy, respected, handsome, and heir to one of the oldest noble families in the kingdom. Mothers pushed their daughters toward him at every ball. Matchmakers practically fought over the opportunity to arrange introductions. He had rejected them all. Some whispered that he was arrogant. Others insisted he carried a secret heartbreak. The truth was simpler. None of them reminded him of the kind of woman his mother had been. The annual memorial gathering had ended only an hour earlier. Relatives had departed. Carriages had rolled away through the rain. Silence once again settled over Ashford Hall. A knock sounded at the gallery door. "Enter." The family solicitor stepped inside carrying a leather document case. "Your Grace," the elderly man said, "there is one final matter." Alexander turned. The solicitor looked unusually nervous. "This was left in my care by your mother before her death. She instructed that it be delivered to you exactly 5 years after she passed." He extended a sealed envelope. Alexander felt an unexpected tightening in his chest. The handwriting on the front belonged unmistakably to the Duchess. For several moments he simply stared at it. Then he broke the seal. "My dearest Alexander, if you are reading this, 5 years have passed since I left this world. I pray you have found peace, though I suspect you still carry too much responsibility and too little happiness." A faint smile touched his lips. That sounded exactly like her. His eyes continued down the page. "One day a young woman named Charlotte Whitmore may come to Ashford Hall. If she does, I ask that you offer her employment, protection, and kindness. You owe her nothing. I ask this only because her mother once showed me extraordinary friendship when I needed it most. Please trust my judgment. Your loving mother." Alexander lowered the letter. "A governess?" he asked. "I believe so," the solicitor replied. "You know nothing more?" "Very little, Your Grace." Alexander glanced back toward the portrait. Even after death, the Duchess somehow continued arranging lives. A week passed. Then another. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. The letter became little more than a curiosity. Until a rainy afternoon near the end of summer. A maid hurried into Alexander's study. "There is a young lady asking for you, Your Grace." Alexander looked up from estate documents. "What young lady?" "She says her name is Charlotte Whitmore." The room suddenly felt quieter. Moments later she was shown inside. She was not what Alexander expected. Her dress was simple but carefully mended. Her gloves were worn thin at the fingertips. Rain dampened the edges of her bonnet. Beside her rested a small suitcase that appeared older than she was. Yet despite obvious hardship, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her posture remained straight. Her gaze steady. Her expression calm. She curtsied politely. "Your Grace." Alexander studied her. "You are Charlotte Whitmore?" "Yes." "And why have you come to Ashford Hall?" For the first time uncertainty flickered across her face. "My mother died 3 months ago." The words were spoken gently, but grief lingered beneath them. "She told me that if life ever became difficult, I should come here. She said the Duchess of Ashford once promised she would watch over me." Charlotte carefully produced a folded recommendation letter. Alexander accepted it. The references were excellent. Educated, experienced, respectable. Everything appeared in order. Still he hesitated. Taking strangers into Ashford Hall was rarely wise. Then he remembered his mother's letter. "Very well," he said. "My nieces require a governess. The position is yours if you wish it." Relief flashed across her features. "Thank you, Your Grace." Over the following weeks, Charlotte transformed parts of the household without appearing to try. Alexander's nieces adored her almost immediately. Lessons became adventures instead of obligations. Laughter returned to schoolrooms that had long been silent. Servants spoke warmly of her kindness. She remembered names. Helped struggling staff. Spent evenings reading stories to frighten children during storms. More than once Alexander observed these things unnoticed from a distance. Each time he found himself lingering longer than intended. Unfortunately, not everyone welcomed her presence. Visitors quickly began talking. Some claimed Charlotte had deliberately engineered her arrival. Others suggested she hoped to become far more than a governess. The whispers spread through drawing rooms and ballrooms with astonishing speed. Charlotte heard them. Alexander knew she did. Yet she never defended herself, never complained, never sought sympathy. Instead, she continued her work with the same quiet grace. One evening, after watching her comfort his youngest niece following a nightmare, Alexander found himself remembering another woman who possessed that same gift. His mother. The realization unsettled him. 4 years he had searched for impossible perfection among noble women. Yet this governess possessed many of the qualities he had admired most. Compassion, integrity, patience, strength hidden beneath gentleness. That night, unable to sleep, Alexander retrieved his mother's letter again. He read it slowly beside the fire. As he folded the page, something caught his attention. The parchment felt thicker than before. Frowning, he examined the paper against the candlelight. There, nearly invisible, was another folded sheet concealed behind the first. His pulse quickened. Carefully he unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably his mother's, and the first sentence stole the breath from his lungs. If Charlotte Whitmore ever comes to Ashford Hall, I hope you will look beyond her circumstances, my son, because I have long believed she may someday become your wife. Autumn arrived at Ashford Hall wrapped in amber leaves and restless winds, yet the warmth Charlotte Whitmore had brought into the estate remained untouched by the changing season. The children flourished beneath her guidance. Servants smiled more easily. Even rooms that had once felt frozen in grief seemed brighter whenever she entered them. For Duke Alexander Ashford, however, peace proved increasingly difficult to find. The second page of his mother's letter lingered constantly in his thoughts. He had read it dozens of times. Each reading unsettled him more than the last. The Duchess had never been careless with her judgments. During her lifetime, she had possessed an uncanny ability to understand people long before they revealed themselves. She had recognized loyalty where others saw weakness. She had discovered goodness beneath humble appearances. Time and again she had proven right. Yet the suggestion that Charlotte Whitmore might someday become his wife seemed impossible. She was a governess. He was a duke. The distance between those worlds could not simply be ignored. And still, whenever he watched Charlotte teaching his nieces beneath the garden arbor or reading beside the library window, he found himself wondering whether his mother had seen something he had not. The kingdom, meanwhile, had reached its own conclusions. Rumors multiplied with astonishing speed. At first they remained harmless whispers. Soon they became accusations. Charlotte allegedly lingered near the Duke whenever guests visited. Charlotte supposedly encouraged the children's affection to secure her position. Charlotte, according to increasingly imaginative gossip, had arrived at Ashford Hall with a carefully designed plan to become Duchess of Ashford. The cruelty of it angered Alexander more than he expected. The woman they described bore no resemblance to the one living beneath his roof. Charlotte never sought attention. In fact, she seemed determined to avoid it. Unfortunately, avoidance only encouraged society's appetite. The situation worsened during a winter charity gala held at the residence of Lady Beatrice Hawthorne, a wealthy widow known for her influence and her envy. Charlotte attended only because Alexander's nieces were performing a small musical recital. The evening began pleasantly enough. Candles glittered from crystal chandeliers. Music drifted through the grand ballroom. Guests laughed behind jeweled masks and sparkling fans. Charlotte remained near the children throughout the event. Yet Lady Beatrice had prepared something far more deliberate. Near the end of the evening, she loudly questioned why a governess appeared so frequently beside the Duke of Ashford. Several guests laughed. Others eagerly joined the conversation. Within minutes Charlotte found herself surrounded by smiling faces sharpened by malice. "Remarkable ambition," one woman remarked. "Indeed," another agreed. "Some women understand exactly how to improve their circumstances." The words were polite. The meaning was not. Alexander witnessed the exchange from across the ballroom. Before Charlotte could respond, he crossed the room. The conversation died immediately. His expression alone silenced them. "My governess is here because she was invited," he said coldly. No one challenged him. But the damage had already been done. The next morning newspapers carried vague references to a mysterious woman who had captivated one of the kingdom's most eligible dukes. Names were not mentioned. They did not need to be. Charlotte became the target of relentless speculation. Invitations ceased. Former acquaintances avoided her. Even some servants from neighboring estates began repeating the stories. One snowy afternoon Alexander found her alone in the schoolroom after the children had gone outside. She stood beside the window watching flakes drift across the gardens. For a moment he simply observed her. There was sadness in her eyes. Not self-pity. Weariness. The quiet exhaustion of someone enduring injustice without complaint. "You should not have to bear this," he said. She turned and offered a faint smile. "People will eventually grow bored." They seemed determined not to. Her smile faded. "I never intended to become a source of trouble for you." The statement struck him harder than any accusation from society. Charlotte's first concern remained his well-being. Even now. Especially now. That evening Alexander made a decision. The following morning he requested a private conversation in the library. Charlotte arrived looking nervous. The fire crackled softly between them. Outside, snow covered the estate in white silence. Alexander wasted no time. "Marry me." The words left Charlotte staring at him in complete disbelief. For several seconds neither moved. Then she laughed softly, certain she had misunderstood. "You cannot be serious." "I am entirely serious." Color drained from her face. "Your Grace." "Alexander." She shook her head immediately. "No." His brows lifted. "No. You deserve someone from your world." "I disagree. You are a duke. And you are the finest woman I know." Charlotte looked away. Emotion flickered across her features. "People already believe terrible things about me. Then let them learn they are wrong." Tears glimmered briefly in her eyes. "You would sacrifice your reputation. I am protecting yours." The room fell silent. Finally Alexander revealed the existence of his mother's second letter. He told her everything. The request. The hope. The faith the Duchess had placed in her years earlier. Charlotte listened in stunned silence. When he finished, tears escaped down her cheeks. "She remembered me," she whispered. "My mother never forgot people who mattered." Several days passed before Charlotte gave her answer. When it came, it was delivered quietly beneath the estate chapel's stained-glass windows. "Yes," she said. The single word changed everything. Their wedding took place 1 week later. No grand celebration accompanied it. No royal guests attended. Only close family, trusted servants, and the family solicitor witnessed the ceremony. Snow fell gently beyond the chapel windows as vows were exchanged. When Alexander placed the ring upon Charlotte's finger, he felt an unexpected sense of certainty. For the first time in years his future seemed clear. Society reacted exactly as expected. Outrage spread through the kingdom. Noble families expressed disbelief. Some openly condemned him. Others treated Charlotte as an opportunist who had somehow deceived one of the realm's most respected men. Yet inside Ashford Hall, something entirely different unfolded. Their marriage began not with passion but with companionship. Companionship gradually became friendship. Friendship deepened into trust. Trust slowly transformed into love. Evenings were spent reading beside the fire. Long rides carried them through forests dusted with snow. Conversations stretched late into the night. Alexander discovered Charlotte's quiet humor. Charlotte discovered the loneliness hidden beneath his confidence. Walls built over years began disappearing. Spring arrived. Then summer. One golden afternoon Charlotte stood in the palace gardens with trembling hands and a racing heart. The physician had just departed. When Alexander found her beneath a flowering arbor, she could barely speak. "You are pale," he said. "Has something happened?" Charlotte placed his hand against her stomach. The realization appeared instantly in his eyes. For one suspended moment neither spoke. Then joy overwhelmed him completely. A child. Their child. The future suddenly felt brighter than either had imagined. For weeks Alexander seemed transformed. He spoke endlessly of nurseries, family traditions, and dreams he had never shared with anyone. Charlotte had never seen him happier. Which was why the arrival of Lady Beatrice Hawthorne at a midsummer gathering chilled her blood. The noblewoman entered carrying a leather portfolio and a triumphant smile. Before dozens of influential guests, she laid several aged documents upon a table and announced that she possessed proof Charlotte Whitmore had planned for years to secure the Ashford fortune. The ballroom fell silent. And as every eye turned toward her, Charlotte felt the first crack appear in the happiness she had only just begun to trust. The silence that followed Lady Beatrice Hawthorne's accusation seemed to swallow the entire ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. Violins continued playing somewhere in the distance, yet the music sounded strangely far away. Every guest stared at Charlotte. Lady Beatrice stood beside the table with the confidence of someone who believed victory was already hers. "These letters speak for themselves," she announced. One by one, she displayed documents supposedly written years earlier. The handwriting appeared to belong to Charlotte. The contents were devastating. Several letters described elaborate plans to gain the trust of the late Duchess of Ashford. Others spoke openly about securing a wealthy marriage. One even mentioned the Ashford fortune by name. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Charlotte felt her blood turn cold. "I never wrote those," she said. Lady Beatrice smiled. "Of course you would deny it." Alexander stepped forward immediately. "These accusations are absurd." His voice carried enough authority to silence the room. For a moment Charlotte felt relief. He believed her. She could see it in his eyes. Lady Beatrice, however, had anticipated resistance. She produced additional papers. Then witnesses. A former maid claimed she had overheard conversations years earlier. A distant acquaintance swore Charlotte often spoke about marrying into nobility. Every statement was carefully prepared. Every lie sounded convincing. The evening ended in disaster. By morning the scandal had spread throughout the kingdom. Newspapers printed endless speculation. Pamphlets appeared in coffeehouses. Society embraced the story with enthusiasm. The idea of a clever governess deceiving a powerful duke was far more entertaining than the truth. Ashford Hall became a fortress surrounded by whispers. Alexander publicly defended his wife. He challenged the accusations, rejected the rumors, demanded evidence. Charlotte loved him for it. Yet she also saw something troubling. The attacks never stopped. Each day brought another accusation, another witness, another forged document, another article. The pressure became relentless. And slowly, almost invisibly, doubt began to appear. Not certainty, not belief, only uncertainty. Charlotte noticed it first during dinner. Alexander would fall silent while reading correspondence. His smile appeared less often. Questions lingered behind his eyes. Questions he hated himself for having. Questions she hated seeing. One rainy evening she found him alone in his study. Stacks of newspapers covered the desk. Candles burned low. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked exhausted. "You should rest," she said softly. Alexander looked up immediately. The affection in his expression remained. So did the worry. "I will soon." Charlotte stepped closer. "Do you believe me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Pain flashed across his face. "Charlotte, please." He rose from his chair. "I want to believe you." The words struck harder than any insult society had thrown at her. "What? Not do. Not always. What?" Alexander immediately realized his mistake. "Charlotte, that isn't what I meant." But she understood exactly what he meant. The man who loved her was fighting for her. The man who loved her was also struggling. Not because she had done anything wrong. Because the entire kingdom had turned their lives into a battlefield. For the first time since their marriage, Charlotte felt truly afraid. Not of the scandal. Of what it was doing to him. The following weeks became increasingly difficult. Alexander continued defending her publicly. Yet every defense cost him influence. Political allies distanced themselves. Business arrangements stalled. Old family friends withdrew support. The reputation of House Ashford began suffering. Charlotte watched the consequences accumulate. She saw servants whispering anxiously. She saw estate managers worrying over contracts. She saw Alexander carrying burdens that grew heavier each day. Still he refused to abandon her. Which somehow made everything worse. One night Charlotte stood alone in the nursery. Moonlight spilled through the windows. Her hand rested upon the gentle curve of her stomach. Their child moved beneath her palm. A tiny life. A future. A family. Tears filled her eyes. She thought about Alexander. She thought about the man who had married her despite society's outrage. The man who had given her dignity, love, and belonging. The man now losing pieces of himself because of her. A terrible realization settled into her heart. The scandal would never end. Not while she remained at Ashford Hall. Not while enemies could use her against him. Charlotte spent the next 3 days making her decision. Every moment felt unbearable. Every glance at Alexander threatened to break her resolve. On the 4th morning she woke before sunrise. The estate remained silent. A pale mist drifted across the gardens. Birdsong echoed faintly through the trees. Charlotte packed a single suitcase. The same worn suitcase she had carried when she first arrived. Somehow that made the pain worse. Before leaving, she entered Alexander's study. His desk stood empty. The room still carried traces of him. Books, letters, a silver watch, the scent of cedar and parchment. With trembling fingers she placed a sealed letter in the center of the desk. Then she left. No farewell. No explanation beyond the words she had written. Hours later Alexander returned from London. The moment he learned Charlotte was gone, terror surged through him. He searched every room, every corridor, every garden path. Finally a servant handed him the letter. His hands shook as he opened it. My dearest Alexander, you once saved me from losing everything. Now it is my turn to save you. I know you still love me. I know you still wish to trust me. That is precisely why I must leave. You have sacrificed enough already. Your name, your peace, your future should not be destroyed because of me. Please do not search for me. Remember only that loving you has been the greatest blessing of my life. And know that I leave carrying a piece of your heart with me. Forever yours, Charlotte. Alexander read the letter 3 times. Then a 4th. Then a 5th. Each reading deepened the horror. She had not left because she stopped loving him. She had left because she loved him too much. The realization shattered him. Months passed. Autumn surrendered to winter. Winter gave way to spring. Ashford Hall felt colder than ever. Alexander searched quietly despite her request. No trace appeared. No letters arrived. No witnesses emerged. Only silence. Then, nearly 7 months after Charlotte's departure, everything changed. A former servant employed by Lady Beatrice was arrested for fraud in another county. Under questioning he confessed. The documents were forged. The witnesses had been bribed. The entire scandal had been manufactured. More confessions followed. Evidence surfaced rapidly. Within days the truth became undeniable. Charlotte had been innocent from the beginning. Alexander sat alone in his study after reading the final report. The room blurred. Every doubt, every hesitation, every moment she had seen uncertainty in his eyes. All of it returned with unbearable clarity. He had failed her. Not completely. Not intentionally. But enough. Enough to make her believe she had to leave. Filled with grief and determination, he launched a relentless search across the kingdom. Weeks later, exhausted and desperate, he stopped at a small coastal inn during a violent storm. As rain battered the windows, an elderly traveler mentioned a village schoolteacher living near the sea. A young widow, he said. Beautiful. Quiet. Recently become a mother. Then the old man laughed softly and added one final detail. The little boy has the Duke of Ashford's eyes, though I doubt either of them knows it. The storm that had delayed Alexander's journey finally broke apart at dawn. Sunlight spilled across the coastline in pale bands of gold as his carriage followed a narrow road overlooking the sea. Waves crashed against dark cliffs below. Gulls circled overhead. Salt lingered in the wind. For 3 days he had traveled without rest. For 7 months he had lived with regret. Now every beat of his heart seemed tied to a single possibility. Charlotte. By midday he reached the village described by the traveler. It was small and unremarkable, tucked between the sea and rolling green hills. Whitewashed cottages lined quiet lanes. Fishing boats rocked gently in the harbor. No one there knew they were speaking to the Duke of Ashford. Alexander preferred it that way. He asked careful questions. A schoolteacher. A young woman. Dark blonde hair. A small child. Every answer led him closer. Finally an elderly baker pointed toward a modest stone building near the edge of the village. The schoolhouse is there. Alexander stood motionless. The journey was over. The fear was beginning. What if she refused to see him? What if she hated him? What if he was too late? For several moments he simply stared at the building. Then he crossed the road. Children's laughter drifted through an open window. The sound stopped him unexpectedly. Charlotte had always loved teaching. Even after everything, she had built a life around helping others. That realization made his chest ache. He approached quietly. Through the window he saw her. She stood beside a chalkboard with sunlight illuminating her hair. For one suspended moment the world disappeared. Months of loneliness collapsed into a single breath. Charlotte looked thinner. Older somehow. Not in years. In sorrow. Yet she remained beautiful. Not because of her appearance. Because of the calm strength she carried even now. Alexander felt emotion rise so suddenly that he nearly turned away. Then movement near the front row captured his attention. A little boy sat among the children. Dark curls. Serious eyes. A stubborn expression. The child looked up toward Charlotte. And Alexander stopped breathing. Those eyes. His eyes. The realization struck with overwhelming force. Every doubt vanished. Every fear disappeared. That child was his son. The bell eventually rang. Children spilled outside laughing and running across the grass. Alexander remained near the gate. Charlotte emerged moments later carrying books beneath one arm. She froze. The books slipped from her hands. For several seconds neither spoke. The sea wind stirred her dress. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Alexander. Her voice sounded fragile. He took one step forward. Then another. I found you. Charlotte stared at him as though uncertain whether he was real. The little boy wandered outside behind her. Curious eyes moved between them. Alexander looked down. The child looked up. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Something ancient and instinctive passed between them. The boy tilted his head. You look like me. A laugh escaped Alexander before he could stop it. A broken laugh filled with tears. Charlotte covered her mouth. The child frowned in confusion. Alexander slowly knelt. What is your name? Edward. His throat tightened. Named after his father. Named after the grandfather he would never meet. Alexander reached for the boy's tiny hand. Edward allowed it. The simple trust nearly shattered him. For the first time he touched his son. For the first time he understood what he had lost. That evening Charlotte agreed to speak with him. Only speak. Nothing more. They sat outside her cottage while Edward slept inside. The sea glimmered beneath moonlight. Waves whispered against the shore. Alexander told her everything. The confessions. The forged evidence. The downfall of the conspirators. The endless search. Charlotte listened quietly. When he finished, silence settled between them. Finally she spoke. You came because you discovered the truth. I came because I love you. Pain flickered across her face. Do you? The question carried months of heartbreak. Alexander felt every word. I never stopped. You doubted me. The accusation was soft. That somehow made it worse. Alexander lowered his gaze. Yes. The truth hung between them. Painful. Unavoidable. I fought the lies, he continued. But I allowed them to exist in my thoughts. Even briefly. That was enough. Charlotte looked toward the sea. The hardest part wasn't the scandal. He waited. It was seeing you struggle. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I knew you loved me. But I also knew part of you was afraid. Alexander closed his eyes. There was no defense. No explanation. Only guilt. I am sorry. The words felt inadequate. Hopelessly inadequate. Yet they were all he possessed. Charlotte said nothing. The next morning he remained in the village. Then the next day. And the day after that. Weeks passed. He rented a room above the baker's shop. He walked Edward to school. Helped repair fences. Read stories before bedtime. Slowly he became part of their routine. Not as a duke. As a father. As a man trying to earn forgiveness. Edward accepted him first. Children often saw truths adults complicated. The boy adored having someone to throw stones into the sea with. Someone to answer endless questions. Someone who listened. Charlotte watched everything. She watched Alexander rise before dawn to help villagers. She watched him miss important meetings in London. She watched him choose their son repeatedly. Gradually the distance between them began shrinking. Not because words healed it. Because actions did. Meanwhile Alexander pursued justice. Investigations expanded throughout the kingdom. Evidence became public. The truth spread rapidly. Lady Beatrice Hawthorne and her allies faced humiliation before the very society they once controlled. Titles remained. Influence vanished. The kingdom learned exactly what had been done to Charlotte Whitmore. Many who once mocked her suddenly changed their tune. Alexander cared little about their opinions. Only one opinion mattered. Charlotte's. Summer arrived. The village bloomed with wildflowers. One afternoon Alexander and Edward sat together near the harbor building a toy sailboat. Charlotte watched from a distance. Father and son laughed together. The sight warmed something she had spent months trying to bury. Hope. For the first time since leaving Ashford Hall, she allowed herself to imagine a future again. That evening she found Alexander alone outside her cottage. Sunset painted the sea in gold and crimson. I believe you, she said quietly. He looked up. Emotion filled his eyes. Charlotte smiled faintly. Not the smile of complete forgiveness. The smile of a door beginning to open. Alexander crossed the distance between them. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. For a moment peace settled over them. Then Charlotte reached inside her shawl and removed an aged envelope. The seal was familiar. Alexander immediately recognized it. His mother's crest. I never told you about this, Charlotte said softly. His pulse quickened. She looked toward the horizon where sea and sky met. Your mother gave this to me years ago through my own mother. She said it must remain unopened until the day you found your family again. The envelope rested between them like a message sent across time. And suddenly both of them realized the late Duchess of Ashford had one final secret still waiting to be revealed. The journey back to Ashford Hall felt unlike any journey Alexander Ashford had ever taken. 4 years he had traveled as a duke carrying authority, responsibility, and expectation. Now he returned carrying something infinitely more precious. His family. Charlotte sat beside him in the carriage while Edward slept against her shoulder. Golden sunlight streamed through the windows as rolling countryside passed beyond the glass. Every so often Alexander glanced toward them simply to reassure himself they were truly there. Charlotte noticed each glance. A faint smile touched her lips. Neither spoke much. Some happiness felt too fragile for words. When the towers of Ashford Hall finally appeared against the horizon, Edward pressed his face to the carriage window. Is that our home? The question struck both parents deeply. Alexander reached forward and gently squeezed his son's shoulder. It is now. The estate staff gathered outside as the carriage arrived. Servants lined the entrance. Gardeners abandoned their work. Housemaids wiped tears from their eyes. Many remembered Charlotte. Many remembered the scandal. All of them knew the truth now. As Charlotte stepped from the carriage, the household welcomed her not as a governess, not as a scandal, but as the Duchess of Ashford. Edward stared at the enormous manor with open wonder. Then he immediately became distracted by 2 excited hunting dogs racing across the lawn. Laughter erupted from everyone nearby. The tension of the past year seemed to loosen all at once. That evening the family gathered in the grand drawing room. The letter rested on a polished mahogany table between them. Alexander had delayed opening it until everyone important could be present. His nieces sat quietly nearby. The family solicitor stood beside the fireplace. Several elderly servants who had adored the late Duchess were invited to attend. Charlotte sat beside Alexander. Edward occupied a place between them, swinging his legs from the edge of his chair. The room glowed with firelight. Outside, twilight deepened over the estate. Inside, every eye remained fixed upon the sealed envelope. Alexander carefully broke the wax seal. For a moment he simply stared at his mother's handwriting. Even after all these years, seeing it felt like hearing her voice again. Then he began reading. My beloved son. If this letter has been opened, then life has unfolded exactly as I hoped. You have found Charlotte. And if Providence has been kind, you have finally discovered what truly matters. Emotion tightened Alexander's throat. The room remained completely silent. He continued. Many years ago I met a frightened little girl standing beside her mother during a charity gathering in London. Most people overlooked her because her family possessed neither title nor fortune. I noticed something different. The little girl spent the entire afternoon helping others. When another child fell and injured her knee, Charlotte comforted her. When an elderly guest became ill, Charlotte fetched assistance. When servants struggled with heavy parcels, Charlotte carried what she could despite being smaller than everyone around her. No one asked her to do those things. She simply did them. Alexander glanced toward Charlotte. Tears already shimmered in her eyes. He continued reading. Years later I met her again. The same kindness remained. The same integrity. The same quiet strength. I have spent much of my life surrounded by people who valued status above character. Charlotte taught me that true nobility has little to do with birth. The words settled heavily over the room. Alexander's grip tightened on the paper. His mother understood Charlotte long before either of them had imagined a future together. The letter continued. My son, wealth fades. Beauty fades. Titles fade. Even great houses eventually become dust. Character remains. Compassion remains. The ability to love despite pain remains. If you are wise enough to recognize those gifts, Charlotte Whitmore will become the greatest blessing of your life. Alexander paused. The sentence blurred. For several moments he could not continue. Charlotte reached for his hand beneath the table. The simple touch steadied him. He drew a breath and read the final portion. There may come a day when fear, pride, or misunderstanding threatens what you build together. If that day arrives, remember this. The strongest families are not those who never suffer. They are those who choose one another again after suffering. If you are reading this beside Charlotte and the family you created together, then I am at peace. Because you have finally found exactly what you need. The letter ended. Silence filled the room. Not empty silence. The kind born from hearts too full to speak. Alexander lowered the page slowly. His mother had seen the future more clearly than anyone. Not literally. Not magically. She had simply understood people. She had recognized goodness when it stood before her. And she had trusted it. The realization overwhelmed him. For months he had carried guilt. For years he had carried grief. Now both emotions crashed together. Alexander rose from his chair. Every person in the room watched him. He moved toward Charlotte. She looked up, uncertain. Then, before family, servants, and friends, the Duke of Ashford dropped to one knee. A collective gasp swept through the room. Charlotte's eyes widened. Alexander took both her hands. For a moment he struggled to speak. When the words finally came, they carried every ounce of truth within him. I should have trusted you completely. Tears filled Charlotte's eyes. I should have protected you better. His voice trembled. I should have recognized sooner that losing you would be the greatest tragedy of my life. The room disappeared around them. Only Charlotte remained. Only the woman he loved. I cannot erase your pain, he continued. I cannot return the months you spent alone. I cannot undo the fear you carried while bringing our son into the world. A tear slipped down his cheek. But I will spend the rest of my life proving you were always worthy of my faith. Charlotte stared at him. The man before her was not the uncertain husband she had left behind. Nor was he the powerful duke society admired. He was simply Alexander. Flawed. Humble. Honest. The man she had loved from the beginning. Another tear escaped her. Then another. Finally she laughed softly through her tears. You always did make apologies impossible to refuse. Laughter rippled through the room. Alexander smiled. A real smile. The first completely unburdened smile he had worn in years. Charlotte lifted his face gently. I forgave you long ago, she whispered. The words shattered the last barrier between them. Alexander rose and gathered her into his arms. Applause erupted throughout the room. His nieces cheered. Several servants openly cried. The family solicitor discreetly removed his spectacles to wipe his eyes. Edward looked around in confusion. Then he tugged on Alexander's sleeve. Does this mean everyone is happy now? The room burst into laughter again. Alexander scooped his son into his arms. Yes. Edward considered this carefully. Good. The following weeks transformed Ashford Hall. Joy returned completely. The estate celebrated with a grand gathering unlike any it had hosted in years. Guests arrived from across the kingdom. Not to gossip. Not to judge. To honor the family that had endured every storm thrown against them. During the celebration, Alexander formally introduced Edward as the future heir of Ashford. The announcement was met with thunderous applause. Charlotte watched her son standing proudly beside his father. A year earlier she had feared he might grow up never knowing the truth. Now he stood exactly where he belonged. The conspirators who had engineered her downfall were remembered only as cautionary tales. Their influence had vanished. Their lies had failed. Truth had endured. Love had endured. As evening settled over the estate, the festivities gradually faded into music and lantern light. Alexander led Charlotte through the palace gardens while Edward ran ahead chasing fireflies. The sky blazed with orange and gold. Roses perfumed the cooling air. For a while they simply walked together. No scandals. No accusations. No distance. Only peace. Edward eventually stopped beside a fountain and became fascinated by a family of swans. Alexander and Charlotte lingered beneath an old oak tree. The sunset illuminated her face. For a moment she looked exactly as she had the day she first arrived, carrying a worn suitcase and uncertain hope. Charlotte smiled. My mother used to tell me something. Alexander squeezed her hand. What was that? Her gaze drifted toward their son. Then back to him. A warmth filled her expression. My mother said you needed a good woman. Emotion flashed across Alexander's face. He looked toward the horizon. Toward the life they nearly lost. Toward the future they had reclaimed. Then he brought her hand to his lips. When he answered, his voice carried certainty, gratitude, and love. She knew exactly what I needed. As the sun disappeared beyond the hills, husband and wife stood together watching their son laugh among the fading light. Above them the windows of Ashford Hall glowed warmly against the evening sky, and for the first time in many years, the great house no longer felt haunted by loss. It felt filled with fulfillment. Two mothers had believed in the same future. One son had finally become wise enough to see it. And beneath a sky painted with the colors of ending and beginning, the Ashford family stepped into a happiness strong enough to last for generations.